Hey everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're looking at something a little different, a text that dives into the story of Cain and Abel.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you know, the one from the Old Testament.
Yeah.
But before you think this is going to be some kind of sermon, just hang on.
Okay.
We're going to be looking at how this ancient story can actually teach us some pretty practical stuff about navigating, like, modern life.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
Things like, dealing with strong emotions and owning up to our mistakes, and even the idea of trusting in something bigger than ourselves.
You know, it is fascinating how these stories that are thousands of years old can still feel so relevant.
Right.
It really speaks to how timeless some of these human struggles are.
Yeah. So to set the scene, let's do a quick recap of the Cain and Abel story. You know, it's all there in Genesis. Cain and Abel, two brothers, each make an offering to God.
Right.
Abel's is accepted. Cain's is not.
Oh.
And then, well, things go south pretty fast.
Yeah. Fueled by jealousy.
Yeah.
It culminates in Cain murdering his brother Abel. Right.
And the text really focuses in on that moment when God confronts Cain, asking him, "Where is Abel, your brother?" Now, what's so interesting is this question kind of echoes a similar one that God asked Adam earlier in Genesis.
Oh, really?
You know, where are you?
Right.
So right from the get-go, we're seeing this theme of accountability.
That's a cool connection.
Yeah.
I'd never thought about that before. It's
Right.
like with both questions, God isn't really asking for like a physical location.
Right?
It's more like God is prompting them to face their choices and the consequences.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And, you know, Cain's response is pretty infamous.
Oh, yeah. You mean his classic line,
Yeah.
"Am I my brother's keeper?"
That's the one.
A phrase that has sparked just endless debate.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But I think, like, at its core, it really shows Cain trying to avoid responsibility. Not just for Abel's death, but for their whole relationship.
Exactly. He's saying he has no obligation to his brother, no responsibility for their bond.
It doesn't go so well for him, though, does it? No, it doesn't.
What happens?
God's judgment on Cain is severe. Banishment, a curse on his ability to work the land,
Oh, wow.
a life of wandering. The text is really emphasizing that actions have consequences.
Yeah, it's a pretty stark picture of justice.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stop there, right?
Right.
There's this really interesting element of mercy kind of woven into the story.
Yes, absolutely. Even as God is punishing Cain, God also offers a kind of protection.
Oh, interesting.
You know, Cain is marked, so no one else can kill him.
Right.
So there's this balance, justice for what he did, but a glimmer of redemption, too.
It reminds me of this concept of restorative justice,
Yeah.
where it's not just about punishment,
Right.
but acknowledging harm, making amends, and allowing for healing.
Yeah, that's a great parallel.
Yeah.
And it leads us right into how this ancient text actually offers some practical guidance for us
Oh, okay.
for taking responsibility in our own lives.
Let's get into that.
Yeah.
What lessons can we take away?
So the text highlights three core teachings. The first one, the importance of understanding and controlling our emotions.
Okay.
Second, the idea of trusting in something larger than ourselves, which, can give us strength and prevent us from being rash.
Right.
And finally, the power of owning our actions, confessing, seeking forgiveness,
Yeah.
and making amends.
Those are some big ideas.
Yeah, they are.
So let's break them down one by one.
Okay.
Let's start with controlling our emotions. The text uses that example of God warning Cain before the murder, saying,
Yeah.
sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must master it.
Right.
But I mean, isn't it just natural to feel strong emotions?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The text isn't saying that emotions themselves are bad.
Right.
It's more about recognizing that when emotions like anger, jealousy, resentment, when those are left unchecked,
Oh, okay.
they can lead to some really destructive choices.
So it's about building that self-awareness.
Yeah.
And finding healthy words to deal with those feelings
Right. Oh, sure.
before they, lead us down a path we might regret.
It's like learning to ride a wave instead of being swallowed by it.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So it seems like that second teaching, trusting in something larger, that could be a really powerful tool in helping us ride those emotional waves.
I think so.
But I imagine that idea might be a little tricky for someone who isn't particularly religious.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
The text talks about trusting in God's justice.
Right.
But how can we broaden that concept?
It's almost like, even if you don't believe in God, is there some other overarching principle or moral code, or even just a belief that humanity is fundamentally good?
Yeah,
Something that helps you stay grounded when everything feels unfair and chaotic.
that's a great way to put it. And I think for some people, that sense of trust might come from believing in things like karma
Oh, yeah.
or that the universe has a way of balancing things out.
Right. So it's not about blind faith.
Yeah.
It's more about finding an anchor that keeps you steady during tough times.
Exactly.
Eh.
And keeps you from making impulsive choices
Right.
based on anger or a sense of injustice.
It's about recognizing you're part of something bigger,
Yes.
a system with an inherent order,
Right.
whether that's spiritual or secular.
Yeah, exactly.
This is already making me think about those times in my own life where maybe I let my emotions get away from me. I'm really going to be chewing on this idea of trusting in a larger system.
I think that's something we could all benefit from reflecting on.
Okay, so we've got controlling our emotions,
Right.
trusting in something bigger.
Yeah.
What about the third one, taking ownership of our actions?
So this is where the text really emphasizes honesty and facing our mistakes.
Okay.
It highlights the power of confessing and asking for forgiveness. It suggests that trying to hide our wrongdoings
Oh.
just creates a cycle of guilt and shame.
So owning up to our mistakes is the first step to actually fixing them.
Yeah, it's like ripping off a Band-Aid.
Right.
Even though it might sting,
Okay.
but it's necessary.
Yeah, and there's actually a lot of research that supports this.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Acknowledging our mistakes, even when it's really hard,
Mm-hmm.
can help us build better relationships.
Exactly.
And find some peace.
If you're constantly trying to hide your mistakes, you're probably not learning from them.
Right.
And that can really hold you back.
Yeah.
But when you're honest with yourself and others,
Mm-hmm.
it opens up space for real connection and growth.
So we've unpacked these 3 teachings.
Yep.
Before we move on, what stands out to you
Oh, that's a good question.
as the biggest takeaway from all this?
I think what really strikes me is how interconnected these teachings are.
Mm-hmm.
They all work together to help us navigate this whole being human thing
Right.
and taking responsibility for the choices that we make.
Right.
But we've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
In part 2, we can dive into some real-life examples
Okay, I like it.
and explore
Mm.
how these teachings actually play out.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got these 3 big ideas, controlling emotions, trusting in something larger than ourselves, and taking ownership of our actions.
Right.
Now, I'm really curious to see how this plays out in real life.
Yeah.
Got any good stories for us?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is this concept of moral luck.
Moral luck.
Yeah. Philosophers use it to talk about how sometimes the consequences of our actions are influenced by things outside of our control.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like 2 people could make the same bad decision,
Right.
but end up with totally different outcomes just based on chance.
Exactly.
How does that tie back to responsibility?
Well, it raises some really tricky questions.
Yeah.
Like if someone gets lucky and avoids the consequences of their actions,
Mm-hmm.
does that make them any less responsible?
Right.
And then on the other hand, what if someone makes a good choice, but still things go wrong because of bad luck?
Yeah.
Does that diminish their good intentions?
Those are some tough questions.
Yeah.
I guess it makes you wonder how much weight should we really give to outcomes when we're trying to figure out if someone is responsible. Mm-hmm.
Like it's easy to judge based on results.
Right.
But maybe the real test is in the choices themselves,
I think so.
whether they lead to good or bad outcomes.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
And it goes back to what the text says about intention.
Okay.
Like, even though Cain ends up with this harsh judgment,
Right.
the text suggests that his offering the one that was rejected,
Yeah.
it might not have come from a bad place.
So maybe it's not just about the outcome,
No.
but also about the mindset.
Exactly.
Like, are we acting from a place of care and concern,
Mm-hmm.
or are we being selfish and disregarding others?
Right. And that's where controlling our emotions becomes so important.
Okay.
If we're driven by, jealousy, rage, resentment,
Yeah.
we're way more likely to make choices that hurt ourselves and others.
It's like those strong emotions can really cloud our judgment
Oh, for sure.
and lead us down the wrong path.
The text seems to say that taking responsibility starts with being aware of those emotional triggers
Okay.
and learning how to deal with them. So that's controlling emotions. What about trusting in something larger than ourselves? How have you seen that play out in the real world?
One example that comes to mind is restorative justice programs.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about those.
So they bring together victims and offenders
Okay.
in a safe space to talk about the harm that was done
Right.
and try to work towards healing and accountability.
So it's not just about punishment.
Right.
It's about repairing the damage and restoring a sense of fairness.
Exactly. It's amazing to see how both victims and offenders can find peace and closure through that process.
Yeah, but I imagine it takes a lot of faith from everybody involved.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, the victims have to trust that the offender is really sorry
Mm,
and wants to make things right,
right,
and the offenders have to trust that the system will give them a chance.
right, to take responsibility and rebuild their lives.
Yeah, it's a really fragile balance.
Yeah,
Vulnerability and hope. Everyone has to step outside their comfort zone
yeah.
and believe that something good can come out of it.
Even though it might be tough.
Exactly. And that trust often comes from a belief in something bigger than themselves.
Hmm.
It could be forgiveness or the idea that people are good deep down,
Right.
or even just hope that justice can prevail.
So if you don't have that belief, it's hard to take that risk and open yourself up to healing.
I think so.
Okay, so we've talked about controlling emotions and trusting in something larger. What about that third one, taking ownership of our actions?
Right.
What about situations where everyone's just blaming each other
Oh, yeah.
instead of looking at their own role in the problem?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think it's so easy to get caught up in that blame game,
Right.
especially when we're feeling hurt or angry.
Mm-hmm.
But the text seems to suggest that real responsibility starts by looking inward,
Okay.
asking yourself, what's my part in this?
Yeah.
How have my choices contributed to this situation?
It's like hitting pause on the blame cycle
Yeah.
and taking a moment to think before you react.
Exactly. And that's where confession comes in. It's not just about admitting you did something wrong to other people, but being honest with yourself about how you might have messed up.
That's a tough but important step.
It is.
Nobody likes to admit they're wrong.
No, they don't.
But maybe that's the key to breaking free from that cycle of blame and defensiveness.
That's a really good point. And it's something you see a lot in therapy.
Oh, really?
Like acknowledging your part in a problem, even if it seems small,
Yeah.
is often the first step towards growth and change.
It's like owning your part, even though it's hard, actually gives you more control over the situation.
Absolutely.
Because once you see your own role, you can start to focus on what you can do to fix things.
That's so true. And it can also inspire others to do the same.
Oh, interesting.
When one person steps up and takes responsibility, it can encourage others to follow.
It's like that Gandhi quote, be the change you want to see in the world,
I love that.
but on a more personal level.
Right, and that brings us to the bigger picture. We've been talking about these teachings for individuals,
Right.
but what happens when we apply these ideas to whole communities,
Yeah.
even societies?
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
It feels like there's a whole other level to this conversation
I've
about
so-
collective responsibility.
Let's explore that in part 3.
All right, so we've talked about how owning our actions can really impact our personal lives.
Right.
But I'm really fascinated by this idea of like collective responsibility.
Yeah.
What happens when we kind of scale these teachings up to the level of communities or even like whole societies?
That's where things get really complex.
Yeah.
But also super interesting.
Right.
We're essentially talking about the social contract.
Oh, okay.
You know, this unwritten agreement we have with each other as members of society.
Right.
It's about recognizing that our individual actions can really impact the well-being of everyone else.
It makes me think about how connected we all are, even if we don't always see it.
Yeah.
Like our actions kind of ripple outwards,
Right.
impacting not just the people close to us, but the wider community and even like future generations.
It's a big concept.
Yeah, it feels pretty weighty.
It is. And it brings up all these questions about how we balance individual freedom with our responsibilities to everyone else.
Where do we draw the line?
Exactly.
Like how much can we really be held accountable for when it comes to these big societal issues?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Take climate change, for example.
Okay.
On the one hand, it feels so overwhelming. Like, what can one person do to make a difference against this massive global problem?
Right.
But then if everybody just says, it's not my problem, then nothing will ever change.
That's the tension at the heart of this whole idea of collective responsibility.
Yeah.
It requires us to shift our perspective,
Okay.
moving away from that every man for himself mentality and recognizing that we're all in this together.
So how do we move from feeling overwhelmed and powerless to actually taking action? Where do we even begin?
I think it starts with education and awareness.
Okay.
You know, the more we understand how interconnected everything is,
Right.
how our choices impact the environment, the economy, social justice, and so on, the more likely we are to make choices that benefit everyone.
Knowledge is power.
Right. But it can't just be information overload.
Yeah.
We have to inspire people.
Right. Show them that collective action can actually work.
Exactly. Show them that it can create real change.
Yeah.
And history is full of inspiring examples.
Oh, yeah, like what?
The civil rights movement.
Right.
The fight for women's suffrage. The push for LGBTQ plus equality.
Right.
All these movements started with individuals taking responsibility,
Yeah.
speaking up and demanding a better future.
Those are great examples. But I think it's important to remember that collective responsibility doesn't always have to be about these massive movements.
Right.
Sometimes it's about those smaller, everyday acts of kindness.
Absolutely.
Compassion and community engagement.
Yeah. It could be as simple as volunteering at a food bank or supporting a local initiative.
Right.
Or even just listening to someone who needs to talk.
Yeah.
Those little acts, when they're multiplied across a community,
Right.
can make a big difference.
It's like we can all be part of the solution in our own way.
I think so.
But I imagine there are some challenges too, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, getting people to buy into this idea of collective responsibility isn't always easy.
What are some of those hurdles?
One of the biggest ones is overcoming apathy and cynicism.
Okay.
People might feel disillusioned with the system or distrustful of authority or just plain tired of all the bad news.
Right. It's hard to stay motivated when it feels like nothing ever changes.
Exactly. It's like, what's the point? My voice doesn't matter. One person can't make a difference.
Right.
And that's why it's so important to build those genuine connections.
Yeah.
Foster a sense of belonging and remind people that their actions really do count.
Right.
Celebrate those small victories. Highlight stories of positive change. Create spaces where people feel like they can make a difference.
It's about creating a culture of hope.
Yes.
A belief that things can get better when we work together.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Without hope, it's so easy to give in to despair.
Right.
But when we choose to believe in the power of collective action, when we choose to see ourselves as part of the solution,
Yeah.
that's when things can really start to change.
Wow, this has been a really thought-provoking conversation.
It has.
We've gone from this ancient text to our own personal experiences to these big questions about changing the world.
I know, it's amazing.
I've got a lot to think about now.
Me too.
It's incredible how the story of Cain and Abel can spark such a wide-ranging discussion.
It is. It really shows the power of storytelling.
Yeah.
And how timeless these questions about responsibility and justice and the choices we make really are.
That's a great point and a perfect place to wrap up our deep dive for today.
Okay.
We've covered a lot, but I hope this conversation gave you some new ideas and inspired you to think differently about the weight of responsibility, both in your own life and in the world around you.
That's what it's all about.
And to all of our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey.
Yes, thank you.
As always, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep looking for those opportunities to make a positive impact.
Absolutely.
No matter how big or small.
Right.
Until next time, stay curious and keep diving deep.